Welcome to episode 6 of Wolverine Hockey Wednesdays. If you're here with us live, you are listening to 88.3 WCBN-FM Ann Arbor. If not, thank you for tuning in wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, William Gregory, with some really special guests today from the Michigan Daily's Ice Hockey Beat, Rekha Leonard, Ellie Richard, and Anna Miller. Guys, how are we doing today?
So good.
We're really happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
I'm doing well. It's great to have you guys, especially because I had a lot of experience covering a number of hockey games last year for WCBN, and we had a pretty good relationship with the Hockey Beat at the time with Connor and John and and we'd always just have a lot of fun with them. So I'm excited to get you guys in the fold, and hockey has become something special to me since watching the Wolverines, and hopefully for you guys too. Obviously, you have to kind of live it. So, I mean, talk about your experience growing to love hockey and why you want to cover it for the University of Michigan.
Well, I can speak for myself. Ellie Richard talking here, by the way. I grew up a hockey fan, like, literally since I was a little kid. I'm from, like, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and we would have Caps games on in the background in the living room. And so I grew up watching with my dad and my brother. We go to an away game every year. We're, like, big fans. So when I started writing for the Daily and I found out I could potentially interview for the Hockey Beat later on, I was like, there's no way this is real. Like, this feels like something out of a movie. So yeah, I mean, this is just like a dream come true. I'm just so grateful to have the experience.
Different to Ellie, my first ever hockey game was when I visited Michigan my junior year of high school. But I've only been to Michigan hockey games, and I just became a big fan. I very much became knowledgeable about the team. So once I joined the Daily, I knew I really wanted to cover hockey, and I'm very grateful that I do get to cover hockey with my incredible beat mates. So.
Yeah, I have a pretty similar experience to Anna. I didn't know a ton about hockey coming into Michigan, but it's been such a fun team to watch just from a fan's perspective. So now being on the Daily and getting to see the other side of that and covering the team, it's been a really cool experience. Been thinking about doing it for a long time since I joined the Daily, so really happy to be here.
We're gonna get you guys to a Red Wings game, especially with how they've been playing recently. It's,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Alex DeBrincat is looking crazy dangerous.
Oh yeah,
recently.
We've talked a lot about DeBrincat and a lot about Larkin on this program.
Yeah, of course.
A bunch of resident Red Wing fans, myself included. So it's been a long time coming for them, and we're happy about it. But you guys, it's an all-female group, which is really cool. Given hockey's reputation as kind of a boys' club, quote unquote. How important is it that you're all in this position, and what does it mean to you guys individually?
Yeah, we were very aware of, I guess, the boys' club narrative of hockey going in. It was something that I think was brought up in all of our beat conferences, just kind of how you would handle that. And at the time that I was conferencing, I had no idea we would end up with an all-female beat, but I'm so happy it worked out that way. It's really cool when we're in the interviews. Like, oftentimes there'll be other reporters there, usually all men, and the fact that there's 4 of us means that we pretty much always outnumber them. So that's just that kind of support of having each other, even walking into what could be an intimidating situation, has meant a lot. And I will also say we've experienced nothing but respect from all the players, coaches, Coach Naurato. Everyone's been great to us, and we've had a fantastic experience. And I think the culture of Michigan hockey has really shown through in how we've been treated as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have a friend who played hockey growing up, and she told me, like, how incredible it is to see 4 female writers for hockey, and that's just, like, not something that she grew up seeing. And she was like, you guys are, like, really inspiring me. And that meant a lot to me. And it's really awesome to be with 3 of my closest friends now, hanging out every weekend. And yeah, reiterating what Rekha said, we have gotten nothing but respect from the team and the coaches and staff, which has been really lovely.
Yeah, I can completely just concur with everything you guys said. Coach Naurato, all the players, like, they shake our hands, they treat us just like we're, any other reporters. Like, I really appreciate that level of respect. And obviously, I grew up sort of as a hockey fan, and I never personally felt like ostracized in any way as a girl watching hockey or following hockey. And I'm glad to see that carry over into the sports journalism world, especially at Michigan. I think that just looks really well in the program, and I'm just happy to be part of it and happy to do it with 4 girls who are becoming some of my closest friends. So it's just awesome.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that, considering, I've been doing hockey games for WCBN for the past 2 seasons, and it isn't often that the booth the press box is full of as many girls as you guys are making it, which is super cool. But moving on to the hockey, we had this weekend against Lindenwood last weekend, which was for Michigan fans spectacular. Not so much for Lindenwood fans. 9-1 the first game, then 10-1 the second game, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I did the first game for WCBN with John Tondora, which was a ton of fun. I've had yet to call a hockey game with him, but it's a team in its second year in Division I hockey. Lindenwood. How much can we factor in Michigan's performance, sweeping their first weekend? They'd split all the other ones. And the goal scoring certainly helps the optics. They moved up to number 4 in the polls. But how can we expect Michigan to replicate this moving forward against better competition, frankly?
Yeah, I think a big thing that Michigan really benefited from this past weekend was Michigan experienced a lot of depth on offense. Obviously, like stars like sophomore forward Gavin Brindley and Rucker McWherty produced, like the top line per se produced. But also you were seeing so much production from the second line, the third line, even the fourth line. Mark Estapa got on the board. TJ Hughes was recently named Big Ten Player of the Week because of how much production. I think he actually led all forwards in the production he had this past weekend. Jackson Hallam, Frank Nazar. It was just, there was so much scoring because it was all coming out from different angles. And I think that if Michigan is able to continually utilize that depth moving forward, I think Michigan is an incredibly dangerous team. But obviously, you got to have the 4 lines rolling and you got to have special teams sort of on point, which was this past weekend, but that's, been a problem in the past. So they'll have to see against competition like Wisconsin, which should be really good. It'll be curious to see if they can replicate that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's not so much the wins that are important about this weekend, it's how they did it, how Michigan accomplished that. Of course, I think everyone was expecting them to sweep Lindenwood. That was what they were supposed to do, just being a highly ranked team, highly talented team. But it perhaps wasn't expected that they would do it by 9-10 goals. And the fact that they did it both nights as well is huge for the consistency and just showing how dangerous they are. I think the thing about Lindenwood is they're a very big team, 6-foot guys, which can be hard for Michigan to compete with, being a little bit smaller. But one thing we've heard a lot from the team is the lack of size doesn't contribute to any lack of physicality. They're a very aggressive team. And that was clear this weekend. It's been clear before. And just getting on the board that much, outscoring or having a scoring differential of 19-2, that was huge for the weekend.
Yeah, I agree. And Barczewski did a really good job this weekend in goal and West too. And I think they'll carry that into this weekend against Wisconsin. They needed the sweep for their momentum, which is something Lys wrote about.
Shout out Lys.
They had a really strong momentum this weekend, which is something that I think they have been struggling with, and their chemistry looked really good. And I think Lindenwood's not a terrible team. They took Ohio State to overtime. You have to recognize that. But yeah, I don't know. I think this weekend was something that they needed for their own motivation.
Yeah, and so I watched the first game, and it seemed like Michigan was able to kind of limit their own retaliatory penalties, because Lindenwood was giving it to him in the first game physically, but the Wolverines were kind of able to shrug it off in the first game. I don't know about the second game, because I heard there were some more mistakes, but what can you guys speak to about Michigan's problem with penalties, but what they've done on special teams this past weekend, and then what the outlook looks like for the future in terms of controlling a little bit of that aggression that leads to more players in the box?
Yeah, Michigan definitely has a penalty problem, and it's a problem that's really hard to diagnose. We've asked Naurato, why are you taking so many penalties? And he's like, if I knew, I would tell you and I would fix it. And it's not, you might think it's maybe because they're a young team, which they are, but that's really not it either. The young players aren't even really the ones taking the penalties most of the time. I think some of it is they're a little bit unlucky. There's a lot of things that go into it, so it's hard to fix, but they definitely need to find that line between being aggressive and too aggressive and knowing where you can place a hit and just what you can do and where you can place your stick. I think one of the things they've brought up is that when you get beat is when you have to overcompensate, and that's when you take a penalty. So just knowing how to like control that a little bit better will just take some time, and there's always a learning curve there. I will say in the second game there were a lot more mistakes. I was writing for that game, so I was definitely paying attention, and like Jacob Truscott, the captain, took a 5-minute major and was ejected, and that was huge. And at UMass, Stephen Holtz, another senior, really important to the defense, took a 5-minute major and ejection. So things like that just can't happen, and that really affects the game. Thankfully, against Lindenwood, they got some shorthanded goals and didn't let it affect them too much, but against UMass, it certainly had a big impact when Holtz was ejected. So that's going to be a major focus going forward. Some games it looks great, and some games they still seem to struggle, and it's hard to tell why.
Yeah, Rekha pretty much covered it. Great job, Rekha.
Yeah.
But I will say something that was interesting that Michigan added to its game recently was this past weekend, the addition of shorthanded goals. That wasn't something we'd previously seen from this team thus far, but I mean, if Michigan is going to take a penalty, if you can score a shorty off of it, like, I mean, it kind of equals out, I guess. But obviously against, teams like Wisconsin, teams like Minnesota, these like really tight Big Ten matchups, like that's not gonna be as feasible. So definitely something Michigan needs to clean up. I think there's a good shot that as the season goes on and the team gets a little more disciplined, I think that the team will start to clean that up. But obviously at the beginning there's some growing pains.
Yeah, and Anna, you mentioned the momentum the goalies have moving into this next weekend in Madison against the Wisconsin Badgers, number 5 in the country.
Yeah.
They gave the Wolverines some trouble in a tough game in the Big Ten tournament a year ago that I had the opportunity to cover. It was obvious that they were attempting to be physically dominant against a smaller Wolverines team. It's kind of the same threads year to year with the Michigan program right now as it is. But with their new coaching staff, the couple transfers they've gotten from schools around Minnesota State was that's where their coach came from. How reasonable is the expectation of a split in Madison for the Wolverines, considering what they did against Ohio State, what they're coming off of, and the momentum they have? What do you guys think about Michigan's chances against a pretty formidable Badger opponent on the road?
I think a split is absolutely reasonable. We're talking about the number 4 and 5 teams in the country. Both have a ton of momentum. Of course, Wisconsin beating Minnesota is maybe carrying a little bit more than Michigan beating Lindenwood. But like I said before, the fact of how badly Michigan beat Lindenwood and how good that must have felt for them to get that first sweep, I think that will carry over. It's definitely hard going on the road for Michigan, a hostile environment. But yeah, I think it should be expected almost that they sweep, or that they split, but it really could go either way with either team coming out with the sweep. It's really hard to tell.
Yeah, I agree. I think a split seems pretty reasonable. I mean, Michigan has a pretty strong top line, and with Barczewski in goal, he's pretty strong. But no, Wisconsin is looking really good with Mike Hastings as coach. Obviously they swept Minnesota, but I do think that a split is feasible. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's feasible. We talked to Dylan Duke the other day a little bit about this, and he was saying how important it is to start out strong. Like the first 5 minutes of the weekend is going to play a really important role in terms of grabbing that momentum and setting the tone. So I'll be curious to see. Anna and I are traveling to Madison on Friday to cover the games. So we'll be right there watching it with them, and I'll be curious to see if they're able to grab that momentum like they say they want to.
Yeah, and the fourth member of your beat, Lys, recently wrote an article, I think it was released today, about Michigan wanting to harness momentum. And
Fantastic.
Obviously she's not here to talk about it, so that's something you're mentioning that Dylan Duke's saying. It seems to be a program headliner right now with the Wolverines. And so how much would a sweep mean in this weekend against such a big opponent, and then given Michigan's troubles sweeping opponents other than Lindenwood this season?
I'm actually, this is funny, I'm actually writing a piece about this literally tonight, after I'm going to go work on it, get it published. So if you're listening to this, you get a bit of a sneak preview. But I definitely think if Michigan is able to capture a sweep against a team like Wisconsin, a team that has just been so dominant to start the season. I mean, that would send a really big message to the rest of the hockey world. Michigan, split the majority of their series early on. And obviously capturing the first sweep last weekend was huge. But for them to carry that on this week, I mean, that would just show that not only can they outmuscle teams, but they can do so consistently. And I think that, that would just be, that's a dangerous team right there. So I'll be curious to see if they're able to do that. Obviously, that would be really big.
It would also be huge for just the Big Ten standings. Mm-hmm. They got 4 points from the Ohio State series, and the Big Ten is just so competitive this year that every point will matter.
Yeah, I agree. And they're playing Minnesota next week at home, too. So it'll be good if they did get a sweep. That would definitely carry their momentum. And getting a sweep away where they don't have the Children of Yost behind them, I think that would be huge.
So to talk about some articles that you guys have already written, not to blow the top off of whatever you're working on, I wanted to talk about some players and what you guys have written about them. Rekha, you wrote about Marshall Warren, the defenseman transfer from Boston College, who seems to be pulling a lot together for Michigan right now. How important has he been for the back end and then for the locker room as a whole?
Yeah, Marshall Warren has been huge. I think the big thing, super noticeable, is that he was named an alternate captain in his first year with the program. He was a captain at Boston College last year, so he does have a ton of that leadership experience. And you can tell when he's on the ice, he's been just such a presence, and they really need him too. Ethan Edwards is out to start the season. Tyler Duke has been struggling through some injuries, missing some games. So Marshall Warren has just shown his versatility, been wherever they need him. And what I kind of talked about in that article is his on-ice production is starting to show itself as well. He had his first goal over the weekend, and that goal was interesting because it was right off the face-off.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Everyone was very happy for him. So you can tell really what he means to the team. But I think with that goal, you could just see the positioning, his hockey IQ. It was right off the face-off. He was just in the right spot. He collected the puck, found a lane, put it up there. Goalie couldn't get to it. And I think the other interesting thing is he is a traditional defenseman. He'll protect his defensive zone first, but he has 23 shots on the year, which is 5th on the team. So a lot more than some of the forwards. I think only Seamus Casey on defense has more than that, and he, as we all know, is an incredible puck handler, takes the puck up a lot. So it's just really interesting how he's been able to attack the net and be such a presence on defense. He really does it all.
Yeah, and I think that Marshall Warren in the first Lindenwood game that I saw was getting kind of knocked around. He got put on the ice a few times, but he was not getting up and taking a penalty off that, which I think we've seen from Michigan before. So leading by example in that regard. And then also his pairing with Stephen Holtz a lot of times as the third line on defense gets sent out there with the fourth line offensively. And Ricky also wrote about that fourth line last week with Marcus Stoppa, Philip LaPointe, and Keenan Draper. How are those guys producing? And I thought they played well in the Lindenwood series. And what benefit do they give the Wolverines with some of their size, namely Estapa, obviously, and their physicality, Estapa. But what they've done recently and how they've developed, because LaPointe would skate some last year and Draper not really in Big Ten play at least. So guys that are getting reps now and developing, what do they mean to the team?
The fourth line has been huge. So impactful, and it doesn't really show up on the stat sheet because they're not really scoring goals, although Mark Staub had 2 this weekend. But what they're doing is just wearing down the opponent, which creates opportunities for the top line, who are your goal scorers, who you want to score. So, they're really good on the forecheck. Marcus Stoppa is excellent in the face-off circle, which is really the role of your fourth-line center. And, just the size, the physicality. He's one of the taller guys on the team. I think everyone knows, too, his problem with penalties. He's still struggling with that a bit this year. Better than last year, but definitely gets a lot of those free Estapa chance anytime he's in the box. So he's definitely one of those guys that needs to find the line between being physical and aggressive and hunting pucks and wearing down those opposing defenses and not taking penalties because they really need him on the ice. He's great on the penalty kill as well. I know Naruto has mentioned he really likes having him out there for that. Especially, too, with the face-off wins. When you can win a face-off on the penalty kill and get the clear early, that saves so much time and energy, or it wastes so much time and saves so much energy. So, he's just been huge. And LaPointe, too, has been great on the forecheck. They've been a really good pairing, just kind of passing around, creating opportunities. Point sets up behind the net a lot and gets some good assists that way. And Draper has also served his role. I think he has less playing time, less experience, sometimes gets tossed out of the lineup for someone like Pletzky. But yeah, I think all three of them have been really impactful and a necessity for this team.
Any other thoughts you guys have on the fourth line? I have a lot of thoughts about Marcus Stoppe. I mentioned last week he's my favorite player on the team.
Yeah, he's looked great this year.
Yeah.
He's so much fun to watch. And against Wisconsin, that at that time Nolan Moyle was on that line with the Stoppe last year, and they got a lot of play late in the year just because of the physicality that other teams were bringing that those players could match. But moving a bit to a top two line guy, TJ Hughes wasn't as heralded as a prospect as Fantilli or any of the other guys that you could mention that are in the NHL right now. Anna, you talked about the kind of plays TJ has been making consistently this season, kind of under the radar, in my opinion. He's also one of my favorite players on this team as it's currently constructed. How much does he mean to this team as a secondary playmaker, although he's a great playmaker, but not the top of the top guy like Brindley or McGroarty or, the national reputation may suggest?
No, TJ's been huge. He's incredible in the face-off circle. He's really good at playmaking. I mean, this is what I wrote about in my piece, but he got 5 points on Saturday against Lindenwood. He has 15 points this season, which is the same as Rekha McGroarty. He has just been a really incredible player. He's really smart. He loves this one spot. He loves to shoot from this one spot left of the goal in the face-off circle, and he's really good at it. He knows exactly where to be to get that perfect assist for his teammates. And yeah, like you said, he's not on the top line, and he's not even drafted, but he's a very important piece to this team. And yeah, great. A lot of plays start with him winning faceoffs. So yeah, he's been huge.
I also I saw him a couple games ago. He kept doing this, like, he would skate behind the net, and then he would go like to his backhand and like kind of send it like right to like that, the area like near the crease. For someone like Hallam or someone, even like I think it was Seamus Casey was the one that netted the goal off of that. But honestly, it was just like such an elite level of playmaking. It kind of took me by surprise. I know as a Caps fan, Evgeny Kuznetsov, that's like his patent pending move, and that was like he's like an elite center in the NHL. So if you're seeing him do something like that, I just think he deserves so much more hype than he probably receives. I think he's starting to get it now with the recognition from the Big Ten, but I completely agree with, Anna said it so eloquently, but I just think he's just so impressive.
Well, for such a long time last year, I kept looking at the line charts I would get, and it's like, oh, well, this guy's drafted, and this guy's not. The way TJ Hughes was playing every single game, I thought it was incredible. And especially with the freshman class last year, I think that he's done a lot of weight pulling in the regard of this year's freshman class not being as deep as I think. I checked the notes when I was there on Friday. It's the smallest freshman class since like 04-05 for Michigan with only 4 freshmen. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you bring in transfers like Warren and Ernest and Brzezinski. But what are these freshmen contributing right now? Obviously, Nick Moldenauer gets a lot of ice time. But what is it? Pletzky, Shifsky, Orko, and Rowe are the freshmen?
Pletzky is a grad transfer.
Oh, Pletzky, yeah.
Rowe, yeah.
Shifsky, Rowe, Moldenhauer.
And Orko?
Yeah.
That's what I thought, yeah. But what are those guys doing right now that in previous years, we've seen so many freshman-heavy lineups that the Wolverines have rolled out, but this year there's a lot of sophomores. But what have those guys been doing that you've been seeing?
I think I was really impressed by Moldenauer's first game. I think, he got a goal and an assist or something like that. I'd have to look over the notes. But I think he had a really strong first showing. I think they're, adapting to Michigan's level of play. Obviously, they haven't played in quite the same level of, big, important games as some of these other sophomores have, so they don't quite have that experience. But I think, game by game, they're growing. I think they're... Moldenauer showing he's really fast. Shifsky's shown that, he also can be a really good playmaker, balances out the lines well. Obviously, we haven't seen as much from Rico. He's only played in 3 or so games. But, I think I'll be curious to see how they develop throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I think Moldy has a lot of potential that we haven't fully gotten to see yet. Same with Shifsky. And yeah, like Ellie said, Oriko hasn't gotten that much play time. He played in UMass while Tyler was hurt.
I think he played Saturday too.
And he
he
played,
did.
yeah, he
Again,
did play
'cause
on
Tyler was
Saturday
hurt.
because Tyler was out. But he doesn't get that many minutes. He kind of just hangs out. And then yeah, Tanner Rowe also played on Saturday.
Yeah, he kind of rotates in there with Pletzky a little bit.
Yeah.
But definitely Moldenhauer and Shifsky are the two that have gotten the most ice time, obviously. And both of them have done pretty well. I think they are still adjusting. Shifsky was really impressive against UMass, I believe. He had a number of goals, especially at a time when the rest of the team seemed to be struggling, especially the second UMass game. He was pretty consistent, which was cool to see from a freshman. He definitely has a ton of potential.
One last player I wanted to talk about. We've got about 3 minutes left in the program today. Ellie, you recently wrote about Jackson Hallam. You mentioned him a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
That goal that he scored, I think it was the second one against Lindenwood, that was incredible.
Yeah, it was crazy.
I got to call that. It was one of the coolest goals I've called, and I've called a couple, one-on-one situation goals, and those are always the most fun to call as a play-by-play guy, but that one specifically, the deke that he made was like...
The toe drag was
The toe
insane.
Oh, like toe drag to the middle, a little shimmy shake against the goalie. Oh my gosh. I think, I think when that goal happened, all of us were in the press box, and literally you just see everybody in the press box stand up and like put their hands on their heads. They're like, oh my gosh, we can't believe we just saw that happen. But yeah, I mean, he's just so fast. Everyone always talks about how fast he is, his speed, but like then he pulls out a move like that, and you're like, wait, this guy has hands too. Like he has it all. So if he can, play like that on a consistent basis, it just contributes to what I said about depth scoring. I mean, he's a really dangerous player. Also, just super nice guy. He's been so nice to us in interviews. So yeah, that's just that was so awesome. Definitely one of the coolest goals I've seen live.
And then lastly, I wanted to get some big picture things. Has there been anything that you've all seen that might be able to shift the narrative of Michigan not being able to get it done against teams outside the Big Ten, especially in the postseason and then in the non-conference this year, splitting with both Providence and UMass, two East Coast teams?
I think now that all of the teams have played more games, it's clear that Providence and UMass are really tough opponents, which maybe wasn't obvious to everyone at the time. And that's really helped this narrative around Michigan, that they were tested early. It wasn't just that they dropped a game against UMass. It was that they faced a really tough opponent, and now UMass is ranked, fairly highly ranked. Providence has been moving up. Hockey East is pretty strong this year, just like the Big Ten. So, like something Naruto has mentioned too, is that even though the record doesn't show it, they're in a better place than they were this time last year. And I feel like that's true, that they've really been tested and they're a young team. We all thought from the beginning there would be a learning curve. That has proven to be true, but there's every opportunity for them to be extremely successful as the season goes on after having this tough test to start.
Yeah, you put that so perfectly, Rekha. I think obviously teams outside the Big Ten are looking really dangerous. Obviously, teams like Boston College, North Dakota, Denver, so on and so forth. But I'll be curious to see how Michigan is able to handle that moving forward in the season.
Yeah, definitely. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun. 3/4 of the Michigan Daily Ice Hockey beat, Rekha Leonard, Anna Miller, Ellie Richard. I've been William Gregory on this episode 6 of Wolverine Hockey Wednesday. Thank you all for tuning in to 88.3 WCBN-FM Ann Arbor. Good night and go blue.